I want to bring my panel in. Nayyirah Haq, former White House senior director and former State Department senior advisor under President Obama. Bob Torricelli, a former Democratic senator from my home state of New Jersey. And Evan Siegfried, a Republican strategist. Nayyirah, to you first, can you give us a sense of the United States' role in Syria and compare it to countries like Russia or Turkey? Because it's definitely not the same.
Absolutely not the same at all. And a large part of this is the United States has been on its back foot when it comes to Syria, trying to support opposition people and groups and even candidates without a clear understanding of who is the leader among all of those groups. You have within those groups people that could be Islamist extremists, which is certainly not something the United States wants to support. And you also have humanitarian organizations involved in that opposition camp. On the other side, you have Assad, which is running essentially a military dictatorship at this point, with the weapons, including fighter jets and missiles of the Russian government behind them. You have Iran in there supporting the Shiites, so they have a religious attachment to supporting the Assad regime. It's been very difficult for Western allies to figure out who they can support and how outside of the UN system. Speaking of the UN system, there is a Security Council meeting today at 3 o'clock. However, Russia has used this system to its advantage, demanding that any humanitarian intervention happen through the UN system and wading through this long process of consensus. In that process, the world has forgotten that a child turning 7 years old today has known nothing but war. So this is the reality on the ground. Without either an outpouring of support from the American public for active military intervention or any moral leadership from President Trump, it seems to be very difficult for the United States to take any direct action.
It is so difficult to look at that video right there, Bob, when you see President Assad and Putin standing there in coat and tie smiling, knowing 400,000 to 500,000 people have been killed in Syria, 11 million people displaced. When you look at images of those little kids laying there on stretchers, getting eye washes after an attack like this, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights published an op-ed, and in it they compared the U.S. missile strike to Syria as, quote, a toddler throwing toys in a momentary squall of emotion. The missiles did nothing but confirm the delinquency of U.S. strategy and the absence of American influence. What's your thought on that? We know the president, and Ivanka said the president was upset when he saw the images of young children. All of us were.
But here's the table that's set in front of John Bolton as he goes to work this morning. We've had 2 administrations and 10 years of relative American disengagement. We're all proud of the 2,000 soldiers that are there, but that is somewhat less than the New Jersey State Police. America has disengaged. Meanwhile, the Iranians have consolidated, making Syria into a client state, and Putin, in a bold and historic move, moving the Russian army and air force into Syria, made it now more than a client state. It's a base of operations. Syria is now an away game for the United States. Whatever we do is going to have to be limited because of 10 years of disengagement. The previous strike, as you just suggested, was no more than bouncing rubble on an old airfield, repaired within hours. It wasn't a positive message. It was a negative message that these kinds of actions of a gas attack bring no consequence. Had we done nothing, it would have had the same impact before.
All right. Well, then, to that note, I want to share, because I noted it a moment ago, General Mattis just spoke, and I want to share that sound. And I also want to share what Lindsey Graham had to say. Here's what Mattis spoke.
First thing we have to look at is why are chemical weapons still being used at all when Russia was the framework guarantor of removing all the chemical weapons. And so working with our allies and partners from NATO to Qatar and elsewhere, we are going to address this issue.
Can you rule out taking actions, launching airstrikes against Assad, Mr. Secretary?
I don't rule out anything right now. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
I don't rule out anything. It was 5 days ago when Trump said, we're not going to stay. And I want to share what Lindsey Graham said on Fox today.
So the regime has to pay a big price. What would be a big price? To lose your Air Force. This should be the last time a barrel bomb is dropped on innocent civilians by the Assad Air Force. We have the capability to destroy his Air Force, to ground his air fleet, and we should use that capability.
What do you think?
Well, first of all, I want to know how much the Syrian military was emboldened by President Trump talking about pulling out of Syria last week. And what I am seeing right now so far are positive steps. I think we're going to end up with a coalition headed
Positive steps by whom?
by both the president and France. I don't normally praise the president, but they had a very productive call. Emmanuel Macron has been on this like a hawk. I think that the United States is going to give the UN Security Council a chance where we know it will fail because of Russia holding the veto, and we will then move forward as a coalition of nations, which will make it stronger. And we need to have a strong strike, take out the Syrian Air Force, perhaps hit some of their intelligence targets, show them that there's a huge price to pay. But at the same time, we need to not make the same mistakes we made last April when we just did a tiny little strike and then walked away. We need to have a long-term solution plan, a long-term plan that will get Assad out and bring peace to the region. That involves sanctioning Russia to bring Russia to heel. It's a very strong message, and it will be controversial.
And look at the Russian stock market. I mean, they are scrambling since the sanctions were announced, figuring out how they're going to help Oleg Deripaska. Does Evan have a fair point here, Bob, in that Emmanuel Macron is one world leader that the president does actually like and trust? I don't know if I would say trust.
On the off chance that my friend John Bolton has anybody watching the show this morning, the most important thing that he can do this morning is consolidate this relationship between Trump and Macron. This cannot be an American-Russian problem. This is a Russian-Western alliance problem. That will bring entirely different consequences. I also agree the only appropriate action here is taking out the Syrian Air Force, denying Assad the one thing he cares about the most. He's an Air Force guy. That's his one card that's powerful. The problem, of course, is how integrated the Syrian Air Force is with the Russians.
Well, we got to leave it there, Evan, but guess what? This story, it's not going away. Let's talk about Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg showing up on the Hill. If you were there questioning him, what would you ask him? Because remember, not just the last year, the last administration, Facebook and the social media universe has been a darling in Washington, not just because of lobbying dollars, but we're talking about Sheryl Sandberg and Mark Zuckerberg, those two possibly running for office not that long ago.
Well, one, I would restrain myself that just because Mark Zuckerberg is not a particularly popular character and is not handled this well, I would not want it to motivate me to be more aggressive on the issue than otherwise I think that I should. Because here's the real answer to what I think we should do in this situation. I've never said this before in all my years of public life.
Sock it to us.
I don't know. I'm just not sure. And my greatest concern would be that we rush to do something. I know I feel strongly about foreign governments interfering in the debate. I know I feel strongly about computer-driven communication without a person behind that. I can see a reason to regulate that. Beyond that, it is really regrettable if these companies can't self-regulate enough in a way that the government has to come in itself and regulate social media. It may be necessary, but it really is regrettable. And I'd at least give them a shot, one more shot, to self-regulate somehow before we do that.
There's something beautiful, though, about I don't know. Because whether we're talking about government, which clearly didn't, and I don't blame them for moving as quickly as technology did, or Mark Zuckerberg himself, he created a behemoth that really has only been on the world stage for the last few years. He didn't know it was going to get this big and this out of control. But I want to share what we've already heard from some lawmakers, because this is what Republican Senator John Kennedy said just yesterday.
We've got to talk about the initial bargain. Who owns my data? Do I own it? Or does Facebook own it? The service agreement with Facebook, it's written in Swahili. Nobody understands it.
He brings up a fair point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that senators need to ask Mark Zuckerberg, are the American people and people throughout the world the consumers, or are they the product? Because if they're just using us to sell our data to other firms that they can use, that's a big, big violation of the trust.
But
and it goes against what it goes against.
Facebook is not a public service. It's not a park. No. We use it for free day in and day out.
The really damning thing for Facebook wasn't the Cambridge Analytica stuff. It was a report from Ars Technica that came out just after that said Facebook had said they had removed paying attention to what you were doing on your Android phone, but the reporter himself was able to download his entire call history, his entire text message history, long after Facebook was doing this. Facebook, for time and time again, and other social media companies have come out and said, we're sorry, we're going to do better for one issue or another. And they've been completely unable to. So how is Mark Zuckerberg responding to coming to Congress? He's hired a team of outside experts to train him on how to do it, because he doesn't want to look too defensive, because nobody's going to be his friend in the Senate tomorrow. And I think that it's going to be a big problem. But it gets to an even bigger problem here, which isn't just social media. We have not written our digital privacy laws. The next 20 years, we're going to see tons of court cases where digital privacy is at the forefront. Who owns our information? Republicans use information to target advertising. Same with Democrats. Same with corporations. And we are getting that from all of these different companies.
Then the answer,
then
it's not about attacking Facebook. It's about writing digital privacy laws for all of us.
Well, part of it is identifying, and privacy is one of it. The other part of it is spreading fake news, right? And part of it is identifying that. So you've got a couple of guys from Berkeley who decided that they wanted to do this. You have somebody else who had great jobs at high-tech companies who decided he was going to leave them to go work for the DNC because he's sitting at home on Inauguration Day and saying we have to do something about the influence of fake news on our democracy. Having said that, that study from MIT is critical. Let's say somehow you eliminate bots, and technically right now they're at the early stages of trying to figure out how to control fake news. It's the human factor. It makes you feel good when you get more retweets, more comments on Facebook, and it's more likely to happen if it's something incendiary or juicy, and that's often fake news.
But one problem with who are the people who are determining what fake news is?
What's satire?
Well, let me say, there's one other force at work here, the more powerful than the Senate. If you're at a Facebook table today, you're talking about what's going on with our users. I don't care what Zuckerberg says. My guess is people are dropping it hand over fist. Talking to your staff out here, Stephanie, that you mentioned Facebook, they look at you cross-eyed. It's like you said you were on AOL in the year 2005.
Okay, well, guess what? They use Instagram, and Facebook owns Instagram. Thank you all so much.